The day I walked into First Meridian Bank on Michigan Avenue and asked to close my account, the branch manager laughed right in my face. Not a polite laugh. Not the kind people use when they feel uncomfortable. A real laugh. The kind that says, "You can't be serious." The kind that says, "People like you don't belong here." His name was Brandon Caldwell. He was 34 years old. He wore expensive suits. His hair was perfect. His smile looked practiced. And just a few days earlier, he had spent an entire family dinner explaining why men like me would never reach the same level as men like him. He didn't know what was in my account, but he was about to find out. My name is David Briggs. I'm 41 years old. I grew up in Rockford, Illinois. My mother raised me in a small 2-bedroom house. She worked 2 jobs. Every dollar mattered. I still remember watching her sit at the kitchen table late at night. She would write our monthly budget on scraps of paper. Sometimes grocery receipts. Sometimes old envelopes. Whatever she could find. She always used a pencil. Because things changed. Bills changed. Life changed. And sometimes she had to erase numbers and start over. I graduated high school in 2001. I never went to college. Not because I couldn't. Because I couldn't afford to. The day after graduation, my mother's second job disappeared. Suddenly there wasn't enough money. College stopped being a dream. Survival became the priority. So I went to work. And that's where this story really begins. But before I tell you everything, let me explain how I met my wife. Her name is Emma Caldwell. Years ago, I attended a trade expo in Chicago. At that time, I was running a small software company from a rented office. Nothing fancy. Just a few employees, a few clients, and a lot of hope. Emma was working at a registration booth. The moment I met her, I noticed something different. She was smart. Really smart. The kind of person who noticed everything. The kind of person who could walk into a room and understand it before anyone else. We started talking, then dating, then spending every free moment together. 2 years later, I asked her to marry me. The funny thing is, I completely ruined the proposal. I had planned an entire evening. Nice restaurant, flowers, everything. But I got nervous. So instead, while we were walking through Grant Park one Tuesday morning, I suddenly stopped and asked her. Just like that. No speech. No plan. No fancy setup. Emma laughed so hard she almost cried. Then she said yes. The following spring we got married. That's when I became part of the Caldwell family. And that's where things became complicated. Emma's father was Robert Caldwell. Robert was a good man. A very successful man. But a good man. He had spent 30 years building First Meridian Bank. Branch by branch. Year by year. Slowly. Patiently. Honestly. He never bragged. Never showed off. You wouldn't know how wealthy he was unless someone told you. I respected him immediately. And thankfully he respected me too. We came from different worlds. But we understood hard work. That was enough. Unfortunately, not everyone in the family felt the same way. Robert's younger brother was Richard Caldwell. And Richard had a habit of looking down on people. Especially people he considered beneath him. The funny thing was that Richard hadn't built much himself. Most of his success came from his last name. But he acted like he owned the world. His son Brandon was exactly the same. Maybe worse. Brandon had a finance degree, expensive suits, a powerful family name, and enough confidence for 10 people. Everything in his life had come easily. And because of that, he assumed everyone else's life had been easy too. The first few times I met Brandon, we barely spoke. Family gatherings, holiday dinners, birthday parties. Nothing important. But everything changed at Robert's 68th birthday dinner. The entire family gathered at Robert's house. It was a beautiful home near Lake Michigan. Emma's mother, Margaret, had spent days preparing the dinner. The house smelled amazing. Roast lamb, fresh pasta, homemade desserts. Everything looked perfect. There were about 12 people around the table. Family members, friends, cousins, everyone laughing and talking. For most of the evening, things went smoothly. Then Richard decided to focus on me. It started with a simple question. Or at least it sounded simple. What did you study in college, David? His tone seemed friendly. But something in his eyes told me otherwise. He already knew the answer. He was setting a trap. So I told the truth. I didn't go to college. Richard nodded slowly. Then he smiled. Well, that's admirable. I waited. Then he added, not everyone needs a degree to get by. To get by. The words hung in the air. Emma immediately placed her hand on my knee under the table. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew I was deciding whether to respond. Across the table, Brandon looked interested. Very interested. like someone watching a movie. "What kind of software company do you run?" he asked. I explained. "Supply chain software, inventory systems, routing systems, business tools. The kind of products that help companies run more efficiently." Brandon smiled. "A small business then?" I nodded. "Something like that." "The lower end of the market?" His smile grew wider. "The lower end still needs services too." A few people shifted uncomfortably. They could hear what he was really saying. But nobody interrupted. Richard chuckled quietly. I took a sip of water. I stayed calm. Because I had learned something important years ago. The moment you let people like that control your emotions, they win. So I remained quiet. Thankfully, Robert stepped in. Unlike his brother, he asked real questions. Questions about my business. Questions about operations. Questions about technology. We ended up having a genuinely interesting conversation. For a few minutes, things improved. Then dessert arrived. And Richard started again. This time he talked about Brandon. His future. His education. His career. His opportunities. Every sentence sounded like a commercial. Then Richard looked directly at me. And smiled. Of course, some paths are harder without the proper foundation. The table became quieter. You can only go so far without the right education. Another smile. The right schools open the right doors. There it was. The insult wasn't hidden anymore. He wanted everyone to hear it. Emma slowly placed her fork down. I looked at Richard, then Brandon, then back at Richard, and I asked one simple question. "Richard, where does First Meridian keep most of its business accounts?" He looked confused. "Mostly at the Michigan Avenue branch." I nodded. "Good to know." He blinked. "What does that mean?" I smiled. "Nothing." Then I returned to my dessert. The conversation moved on. But I noticed Richard watching me, trying to understand, trying to figure out what I meant. The truth was simple. I had already made my decision. But to understand why, you need to understand where I came from. After high school, I started working at a shipping warehouse. The job wasn't glamorous. Long hours, heavy lifting, constant pressure. But I paid attention. I noticed patterns, problems, inefficiencies. I couldn't stop noticing them. Eventually I started creating systems. Simple systems. Ways to improve workflow. Ways to improve speed. Ways to eliminate mistakes. Nobody asked me to do it. I just couldn't help myself. One day my supervisor, George Kinsey, called me into his office. George wore the same jacket almost every day. He pointed at one of my systems. Then he said something that changed my life. "Someone's going to make money from this someday." I laughed. "You didn't?" "I'm serious." That conversation stayed with me. For years. Eventually I started taking night classes. Not college. Just enough programming courses to understand software development. Then I met a developer named Nathan. Together we built a prototype. Then another. Then another. Most companies rejected us. Some ignored us. Many laughed. But a few listened. And that's all we needed. A few yes. Those few yes became paying clients. Those clients became revenue. That revenue became growth. And that growth became a company. By the time I met Emma, the company was stable. By the time we married, it was thriving. And 5 years before Robert's birthday dinner, I made the biggest gamble of my career. A risky expansion into pharmaceutical logistics. Everyone thought I was crazy. Employees quit. Money disappeared. Stress exploded. For months I didn't even pay myself. But I kept going. Because I believed in the product. Eventually the risk paid off. One major contract became 2. Then 3. Then 10. Revenue exploded. Growth accelerated. And while Richard Caldwell was explaining my ceiling during dinner, my company was generating numbers that would have completely changed his opinion. Not that his opinion mattered. Because success doesn't need permission. The funny thing is that Richard never asked about my company. Never asked about revenue. Never asked about clients. He assumed he already knew everything. And assumptions are dangerous. Especially when they're wrong. 10 days after that dinner, I walked into First Meridian Bank. And I was about to give Brandon Caldwell a lesson neither of us would ever forget. 10 days after Robert Caldwell's birthday dinner, I walked into First Meridian Bank. The Michigan Avenue branch was exactly what you would expect from a major bank in downtown Chicago. Tall ceilings, polished floors, expensive furniture. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt expensive. The kind of place designed to impress people. The kind of place designed to make certain people feel important. I walked through the front doors carrying nothing but my phone and a folder. I wasn't there to cause trouble. I wasn't there for revenge. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was simply there to close an account that held over $4 million. A young employee greeted me with a friendly smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'd like to speak with a relationship manager." "Of course." A few minutes later I was seated at a desk. The employee introduced herself as Lauren. She smiled while opening my account information. Then her expression changed. Immediately, her eyes widened slightly. She looked back at me, then back at the screen, then back at me again. Without saying anything, she excused herself. A minute later, another familiar face appeared. Brandon Caldwell. The same Brandon who had smiled at me across the dinner table. The same Brandon who had called my business small. The same Brandon who believed he knew exactly who I was. For a brief moment he looked confused. Then he recognized me, and I watched his expression change. The confidence was still there. But now something else appeared. Curiosity. "David," he said. His voice sounded much friendlier than it had at dinner. Much friendlier. "I didn't know you banked with us." I smiled politely. "Apparently." He laughed awkwardly, then motioned toward his office. "Come on back." I followed him. The office was clean and modern. Large desk, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows. The type of office designed to make success look easy. Brandon offered me coffee. I declined. He offered water. I declined again. Then he sat down. "What can I help you with today?" His smile remained in place. I looked directly at him. "I'd like to close my account." His smile froze. Only for a second. But I saw it. The tiny crack. "The account?" he asked. "Yes." He glanced toward his computer. Then back at me. Then back at the computer again. I could almost see the calculations happening inside his head. "David, your account contains significant funds." "I know. May I ask why you're leaving?" "I've made my decision." He leaned back slightly, trying to stay professional, trying to understand what was happening. Our clients at this level typically discuss major decisions before making changes. I tilted my head. "At this level?" His face tightened. He turned the monitor slightly. The balance appeared on the screen. $4,212,000. $4,212,000. The silence that followed felt enormous. I looked at the number, then back at him. "I know what's in my account." Brandon swallowed. Suddenly the conversation felt very different. At the birthday dinner he thought I was struggling. He thought I ran some tiny business. He thought I had limits. Now he was staring at proof that his assumptions had been completely wrong. To his credit, he recovered quickly. He was good at hiding emotions, but not good enough. I could still see it. Embarrassment. Regret. "David," he said carefully, "I want to apologize." There it was. The apology. The one that never would have happened if my account balance had been smaller. I remained quiet. My father and I may have said some things poorly. I almost smiled. Poorly. That was one way to describe it. He continued. "We made assumptions." I nodded. "Yes, you did." For a moment he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Then he straightened his tie. "Would you allow me to bring in a senior relationship manager?" "No." The answer surprised him. "You can handle it." Another silence filled the room. This one felt even heavier, because Brandon understood exactly what I was doing. I wasn't going to let someone else complete the transaction. I wasn't going to let him escape the moment. He would process it himself. Every dollar, every form, every signature. He would personally watch $4 million leave his branch, and then he would have to explain why. For the next several minutes, neither of us spoke much. He prepared documents, verified information, completed forms. Everything remained professional. But underneath it all, something important was happening. A lesson. Not about money. About assumptions. Eventually he asked the final question. "Cashier's check or wire transfer?" "Wire transfer." He entered the information, double-checked the routing numbers, then completed the transfer. Just like that. Years of banking history disappeared from First Meridian. Gone. Moved somewhere else. A few clicks. A few signatures. And it was over. When everything was finished, Brandon looked up. "One last attempt. Is there anything I can do to change your mind?" I thought about Richard's words. The ceiling. The limits. The assumptions. Then I smiled. "No." That single word carried everything. He nodded slowly, then stood. I stood too. For a moment we simply looked at each other. Finally he extended his hand. I shook it. Then I walked out. The doors opened. Cold November air hit my face. I stepped onto Michigan Avenue, and for the first time in days I felt completely calm. Not angry, not bitter. Calm. Because the account wasn't the point. The money wasn't the point. The point was knowing exactly who I was, and not needing anyone else's approval. That evening I told Emma what happened. We were sitting in our kitchen. When I finished the story, she stared at me for a moment. Then she laughed. A real laugh. The kind that made her eyes water. "Did it feel good?" she asked. I thought carefully, then smiled. Better than I expected. That made her laugh even harder. A few days later, Robert called. His voice sounded serious. "I heard about the account. I figured you would." He sighed. Then he asked what happened. So I told him. Everything. The comments. The assumptions. The dinner conversation. The bank visit. The transfer. All of it. When I finished, Robert stayed quiet for several seconds. Then he said something I respected deeply. "I'm sorry." Not an excuse. Not a defense. Not a justification. Just an apology. Simple and honest. I should have spoken up sooner. I appreciated that. Because most people protect family. Even when family is wrong. But Robert wasn't like that. A week later, Richard called me. I almost didn't answer. But I did. "David," he said. His voice sounded different. Less confident. Less certain. "I owe you an apology." We met for coffee. And for the first time since I'd known him, Richard seemed humble. Actually humble. Not pretending. Not performing. Real humility. He admitted he had judged me. Admitted he had been wrong. Admitted he often measured people by degrees and family names instead of character. It wasn't easy for him. I could tell. But he said it anyway. And that mattered. Near the end of the conversation, he asked if my company might be interested in working with First Meridian's business clients. Partnerships. Referrals. Joint opportunities. I told him I'd think about it. And I meant it. Because despite everything, I wasn't interested in revenge. Revenge is exhausting. Building something better is far more satisfying. A few weeks later, I received a handwritten letter. From Brandon. That surprised me. Most people send emails. He wrote a letter. In it, he admitted he had researched my company after I left the bank. He admitted he had been impressed. And he admitted his assumptions had been unfair. When I finished reading it, I sat quietly for a while. Then I wrote back. Not a long letter. Just enough to acknowledge the effort. Because growth deserves recognition. Even when it comes late. The truth is, people like Richard and Brandon weren't the most important part of my story. They never were. The most important part happened long before they met me. The warehouse. The long nights. The failures. The risks. The years nobody noticed. The years nobody applauded. Those years mattered. Not because they made me wealthy. Because they made me capable. Sometimes people only see the result. They see the success. The money. The business. The nice office. The contracts. But they never see the years that came before. The sacrifices. The uncertainty. The fear. The work. Those hidden years are where success is really built. I think about my mother often. Especially during moments like these. She never had a college degree. Never had a powerful family name. Never had connections. But she never believed in ceilings. She believed in work. She believed in persistence. She believed in solving the next problem. Then the next one. Then the next one. That mindset changed my life. Years later, my company signed the largest contract in its history. A national pharmaceutical distributor. A deal worth millions. When I told Emma, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Then she immediately called her parents. Margaret cried. Robert opened a bottle of wine. And for the first time, the entire family celebrated together. No assumptions. No judgments. No ceilings. Just respect. Today I still bank with Lakeshore. The service is excellent. The fees are lower. And nobody there has ever asked where I went to college. I graduated from Jefferson High School in 2001. That's it. No fancy degree. No prestigious university. No special connections. And I'm proud of that. Because every step afterward was earned. Sometimes people ask me if I regret closing the account. The answer is simple. No, not for a second. Because that moment taught me something important. Ceilings do exist. I've hit plenty of them. But most ceilings aren't made of concrete. They're made from assumptions. Other people's assumptions. And assumptions are fragile things. The moment you stop believing them, they lose all power. Richard assumed he knew my limits. Brandon assumed he understood my future. They were wrong. Not because I was special. Not because I was lucky. because they only looked at where I came from. They never looked at where I was going. And that's the mistake many people make. They judge the beginning of someone's story, then assume they already know the ending. But life doesn't work that way. The people who keep building, the people who keep learning, the people who refuse to quit, they're the ones who surprise everyone, including themselves. And that's exactly what happened to me. The account was never the victory. The money was never the victory. The victory was walking out of that bank knowing I never needed anyone's permission to succeed. Not Richard's. Not Brandon's. Not anyone's. The moment those glass doors closed behind me, I realized something. The only ceiling that had ever mattered was the one I refused to accept. And the beautiful thing about ceilings built from assumptions is this: you can walk away from them anytime you want.